Hey there, and welcome back to the Ingrain Workshop. I'm Rick Fussell, and in today's video, we're going to be building a DIY doghouse for the shop dog Dixie. So let's get started. Do is start removing the pavers and then start disassembling the kennel, which is where our dog used to stay, and this is where the doghouse is going to go. And as you can see, I solicited the help of the supervisor because that was the only way that this was going to get done. Once we got the kennel removed, we brought in some fill dirt and just started to level the area where the doghouse was going to go. And also compacted the area really good so we wouldn't have any settlement issues once we formed up and poured the slab. And then once we get this all compacted and level, then I'm going to take and build a form. I think I formed it up 5 foot by 6 foot, and that's going to be the size of our doghouse. And as you can see here, I went ahead and just formed it up inside the workshop. And again, I'm just using 2x4s. So once I got it formed and got it out there, I took and made sure I got it level, and then I cut some 2x4 corner posts to screw to, and then I'll take and fasten those at each corner of the form just to hold the form in place. That way the concrete doesn't push it out. And you can see I also solicited the help of the foreman because in all reality, this is his dog that we're doing this for. So once I get all the corner posts nailed in, you definitely want to make sure that the corner posts do not stick up proud of the form. You want the corner post to be below the top of the form. And then once I got those in place, then I'm just going to take some 2.5-inch torque screws and go ahead and screw the actual form to the post. Make sure everything's level. And then all of a sudden the client shows up, and as you can see, she's checking out the work, inspecting, making sure that everything is being built the way that she wants it. And then she's also going to take and try it on for size and make sure that the house is going to be big enough for her needs. And I think 5x6 is plenty of room for her, and then she's happy, and we're good to go. With the top of the forms all level, I'm going to take some 2.5-inch torque screws now and just go ahead and screw the corner post into the form. And like I had mentioned earlier, you just want to make sure that the tops of the form are above the corner post, because at the end, once we're done pouring the concrete, when we go back to screed the concrete, you don't want to be hitting the post. You don't want the corner post to be proud of the form. You want the top of the form to be flush all the way across. That way you get a good screed on your concrete. And next we're going to take, we did get a 1 1/4 cubic feet mixer for this project, and I'll leave a link in the video description below. And we're going to use this to mix up our concrete. And I think we were able to mix 1.5 bags at a time. Anything more than that, and it's just going to bog the mixer down, but it still beats mixing the concrete out of a wheelbarrow. So I highly recommend, if you've got a small job, to just get yourself a small 1 1/4 cubic foot mixer. And they sell them bigger as well, depending on the size project that you need to do. But this was big enough for our project. I think it took us 25 to 30 bags of concrete to pour this 5x6 slab. And basically what we did is the supervisor, screeded out the concrete while the foreman and myself just constantly mixed. We were in constant mix mode. And then we just took a 2x4 and screeded the concrete flush to the top of the form. And then I do have a actual concrete screed, which I'll run over the top of the slab just to make sure it's nice and level and slick and all the aggregate is pushed down and you just have a smooth, slick surface. We decided not to go with a broom finish because this is going to be inside the doghouse. So we thought it would be nicer for her to be able to lay on a solid, smooth surface and the coolness of the concrete is definitely going to be nice for her to be able to lay directly on. There you have it. The concrete slab is now poured. I'm going to give it probably a day to set up, maybe 2 before I knock off the form boards. So I went to one of the big box stores and picked up all the lumber, the corrugated metal roofing, some furring strips I was going to use for the trim, along with some beadboard I was going to use for the siding. Okay, so now that we have the concrete slab poured in place and ready to go, we've got all our dimensional lumber inside the workshop. We're going to actually start framing and building the walls inside the workshop here. We'll build a wall at a time, and then once we get all the walls built, all the trusses built, then we'll take and go outside and assemble all the walls in place on the slab along with the roof trusses. And we're actually going to go ahead and put the siding on the walls here in the workshop. So it's a completed wall unit, painted, ready to go once we take it outside and mount it to the slab. So another good thing about having it all done here in the workshop is that I've got my computer back here, and this particular computer that I have inside my workshop is for primarily 2 reasons. One, just to watch YouTube, but the other reason is for SketchUp. So that's pretty much the only thing I have on this computer. So as you can see behind me, we've got the dog house pretty much drawn out here in SketchUp. So now all I have to do whenever I'm cutting the lumber, I can just come over here to the computer, reference the cut list extension on SketchUp, and I can see what lengths that I need to cut all my boards and to look at the framing, so we can go ahead and start the installation here in the workshop. So let's go ahead and start framing the walls next. Just like you would frame a typical house, I'm going to use a pressure treated bottom plate and then just a single top plate. I know for doing a house there would be a double top plate, but again, this is just a dog house. But I am going to lay everything out on 16-inch centers. That way, it adds some lateral stability to the walls. I am going to pocket hole the studs, and you'll notice that I'm using the blue Craig pocket hole screws. These are rated for moisture locations. So whenever you're fastening anything into a piece of pressure treated wood, you should be using a galvanized fastener or a fastener rated for a moisture scenario. And again, you can see I've got a positive stop at 16 inches between to keep the studs at 16 inches on center. And I'm just going to go down the wall, installing the studs to the bottom plate, and then I'm going to lay the whole wall down and use 2.5-inch torque screws, and these will be non-galvanized screws to screw the studs to the top plate. And again, the top plate is not a moisture area, so you can get away with just using regular non-galvanized screws. Prior to this project, I'd been using the Craig, I think K2000 pocket hole jig. It's made out of a plastic and it didn't have a dust port. I bought this, I think it's called an Enjoy Wood pocket hole jig. It's made out of cast aluminum. It has a height adjustment for the thickness of the wood. It has metric on one side and empirical measurements on the other. And it also comes with a stop depth guide for your drill bit. I highly recommend this pocket hole jig. I was very impressed. There was no give in the jig at all, and there was no dust when I was done drilling all these pocket holes. It worked out great. It definitely exceeded my expectations, and I'll leave a link in the video description below if you guys want to pick one up. Now this is the front wall of the doghouse, and as you can see here, I went ahead and framed the window and the door opening. You know, like a traditional house, I didn't use jack studs or king studs. It's just simple framing. I started ripping down the exterior plywood here, and as you can see, I'm using one of my DIY track saw jigs. I highly recommend this jig, and I'll leave a link here to where you can go if you want to see how to build one for yourself. I highly recommend having this jig in the workshop. I use it numerous times. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch by 1 inch crown staple. These are galvanized just to fasten the siding to the wall. And I've left myself probably about 1 inch overhang on the siding. And then I'm going to go back with a flush cut trim bit on the router and then just trim up the edges of the walls, and then use that same bit to cut out for the door and the window. And that just seems to be the most effective way to cut out these openings. They're nice and clean. And then I took the walls outside and used the same stain I used in a fence project that I did earlier. I think it's a transparent or semi-transparent stain. Brandy Wine, I think, was the name. It's a Valspar brand that I got at Lowe's. And then I'm going to come and take the furring strips and rip them down to size, and I'll paint those as well. And then using the same crown staples, I'll fasten the trim around the door and the window openings. So I ripped the window trim down to, I believe, 1.5 inches wide, and then I left the door trim at 2.5 inches. And also on the header pieces of trim over the door and the window, I went ahead and cut a 45 down at the bottom, to cut a dog ear on the trim. Get it? Dog ear? Doghouse. Anyway, I think aesthetically it made the trim look a lot nicer, and anything to just spruce up the doghouse. You could just leave these at 90-degree cuts, but I think cutting a 45 dog ear on the bottom of the header really made it look a little bit nicer, and that's what the supervisor wanted, so that's what I did. Okay, so now that the concrete slab is complete, we prefab the walls inside the workshop, so the walls are ready to go. It's now time to stand the walls up and put them on the slab. So the way that we're going to be using to fasten our walls to the slab is with a ramset gun. I don't know if you're familiar with a ramset gun, but it runs off of gas or a cartridge. This particular gun takes a 22 caliber cartridge, which is just like a gun cartridge, shell casing, and it's got a primer on it. Once you pull the trigger, there's an explosion, and that gas from the explosion is what forces the nail into the concrete. So we're going to be using 2.5 inch galvanized ramset nails to go through the bottom, our pressure treated bottom plates, and then that will give us 1 inch penetration in the concrete, which should allow us enough penetration to securely fasten the walls to the slab. So let me show you what that looks like. Say hello to my little friend. Okay, I couldn't resist the Scarface monologue. And then what's this with the foreman showing his affection for the client? I don't think that's too professional. So now with the back corner of the doghouse plumb, the two back wall, or the back wall and the side walls are plumb and level, I'm going to shoot some 2.5-inch torque screws into the top plate and then down the corner stud just to fasten those two walls together before I install the other side wall. So there you have it. It was that simple. I think it was a lot easier to prefab the walls in the workshop and then just bring the 4 walls out here, stand them up, nail them to the foundation, and we're good to go. Now, I highly recommend the Ramset gun. I've had that gun for like 12 years. I don't use it that often, but when you need it, it's great to have it. And, you know, unlike my AR-15s in the military, you really don't have to clean them. I don't think I've ever cleaned it. It's got rust on it and it still fires, probably better than my AR-15. So I highly recommend the Ramset gun, and it's definitely a tool that you want to have in your toolbox. Okay, so we're back in the workshop, and what we're going to do, similar to what we did with the walls, we're going to take and prefab the trusses here in the workshop and then take them out there and install them on top of the doghouse. So I've done one mock-up truss, and I just wanted to show you to give you an idea of what it's going to look like. So this is the mock-up truss, and what I've done is I've marked here at the peak, this is an angle. It's a common 8 is what it is on the speech square, and the degree is actually 33 degrees. Then I've just used 2 pieces of scrap plywood just to give it some support here in the middle to keep it from spreading out. And then I've got a bird's mouth on both sides, and this is where the truss will sit on the top plate. And again, this is cut based on the same angles that your roof pitch is. So a common 8 is basically for every 8 inches of rise, there's 12 inches of run. And that's how these angles are determined, and I'll show you on the speed square. So this is the speed square, and as you can see here, it says pivot. So this is our pivot point here. And then across the bottom here, you'll see that it says common. So these are your common roof pitches, and it ranges from 1 all the way to 30 common, and what we used is 8. So when you pivot this on the truss and line it up with the common 8, that's going to give you a 33 degree angle, and let me show you. So this is the end of our truss. So I'm going to start at the top and use this as my pivot point, and then I'm going to pivot the speed square until it reads 8. So it's reading 8. So it's reading 8, and then that angle is 33 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the angle. And I'm really not even marking an angle. I'm just marking 8 here on the speed square from my pivot point. So here we are at the miter saw, and I've went ahead and set up the miter saw to a 33 degree angle. And let's check it and see if it matches our line. And it matches it dead on. So instead of using the speed square every time, I know I've got my degrees set up here on the miter saw, so I'm just going to cut all the trusses based on the miter saw here at 33 degrees. Again, you don't need a miter saw to make these cuts. You could use the speed square like I had previously shown and just cut them with a circular saw on your sawhorses, but since I'm prefabbing this inside the workshop and I've got the miter saw right there, it's just much more easier to do it that way. And then I screwed some pocket holes, so I took one of the trusses to the pocket hole jig, drilled 2 pocket holes, and now I'm fastening the 2 cords of the truss together This will just give it some stability. And then I'm going to go and install the scrap plywood using 2.5-inch Torx screws, which again will just keep the trusses from wanting to slide apart. And then I'm going to use the mock-up truss so I can go ahead and lay out the bird's mouth and the overhangs. Okay, since my mock-up already had the bird's mouths cut into it, because I took my mock-up over to where the walls were, centered it, and then made the markings on where the bird mouth needed to go, then it was just a matter of tracing them out on all the other studs. So I'm using this first mock-up stud as a template for making all the other studs. Once I got the bird's mouth and the truss overhangs cut out of the truss, I went back on the top chord of the truss and cut out a 2.5-inch by 3/4-inch opening at 3 locations on each side of the truss. Now this is going to be for a 2.5-inch by 3/4-inch wood furring strip, what I would typically call a purlin in a metal building. And what that is going to do is it's going to run parallel to the length of the doghouse, and it's going to keep the trusses in line together and provide lateral support to the truss. And here I'm going to take the same siding I used on the walls, and I'm going to use this just for the 2 gable end trusses. And just like I did for the walls, to trim the plywood, I'm just going to use a router with a flush cut trim bit on it to trim off the excess plywood. And again, this method worked the best. You could take and cut it out with a Sawzall or with your skill saw, but the router worked best. Just like we did for the walls by prefabbing them in the workshop and then bringing them out here to where the slab is, I did the same thing for the roof trusses. I prefabbed the roof trusses inside the workshop, and now I've brought them out here to the actual doghouse. I prefabbed 2 gable end trusses and then 2 intermediate trusses. I also notched out 4 purlins, which we'll put and will be used to give the trusses lateral support. But the purlins will serve 2 purposes. They'll not only give the trusses lateral support, but they'll also give me something to screw to fasten the corrugated metal roof onto the trusses. So now I'm getting ready to cut the corrugated metal roof panels. I'm going to cut them 51 inches long. By cutting them at 51 inches long, that's going to leave me a 1-inch air gap at the ridge vent and a 2-inch overhang past the bottom of the roof truss. Now to make these cuts, I'm just going to use a circular saw, but I did install a DeWalt metal cutting blade. That's the most effective way that I use to cut this corrugated metal roofing. And leaving the 1-inch air gap in the ridge will allow the hot air inside the doghouse to escape. So the open rafter ends are all open, so cool air will be able to come from under the roof rafters, and then the hot air will be expelled through the ridge vent. All right, so next thing we're going to do is install the corrugated metal on the roofing. So as you can probably see over my shoulder, I went ahead and installed the corrugated metal on the right hand side of the doghouse, and it's now complete. I didn't record it because I'm right here by the fence and there's literally no room for me to get in there and work and try to record. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record me installing the left side of the doghouse, and you'll see there are only 3 corrugated panels per side, so I only need 3 corrugated panels. I'm cutting them down to 50 inches. That's going to leave me a little air gap at the ridge vent, and then leave me an 1.5 inch overhang on the rafter ends. Okay, so I did build a rafter jig. So this is the jig I made just so I wouldn't have to measure the corrugated metal overhang at the rafter ends. So I could just hold this up to the end of the rafters like this, and then as I put the corrugated metal panel in place, it will automatically overhang 1.5 inches because I've just got a 2x4 spacer, which the nominal inches is 1.5 inches for a 2x4. So that will leave the corrugated metal overhanging the rafter tails by 1.5 inches, which is what I was looking for. So a pro tip, when you're installing these galvanized 1-inch screws for corrugated metal, I'll try to zoom in and see if it'll focus on that. But it comes with a rubber washer, and when you're using your drill, you don't want to drill it down too hard and flatten the washer all the way out. You just want it to grab and make a nice seal. So be careful if you're using a impact driver or something like that. Loosen up on the torque. That way you don't screw it down too tight, because you can overscrew these roofing screws. The roof deck is now complete, and you can see that it's a fairly nice roof for a doghouse. It's just the corrugated metal that you pick up at the big box store. I got an 1.5 inch overhang at the rafter tail, and then I've got a ridge vent at the top, and then 1.5 inches on the other side. And I think at the ends of the gables I might have had a 2-inch overhang, and that worked out great. Now with the roof completed, I had to go back and install some trim. This is corner trim. It's the same width as the door trim. I believe it's 2.5 inches. So I am cutting the back trim down to 2 inches. That way, visibly, it'll look like there's 2.5 inches on each end of the corner, depending on which side of the corner you're looking at. So you do have to keep that in mind. And then also, once I stepped back and took a look after I had all the corner trim on, it looked like it was missing something. So I did go back and install some trim here at the gable end, and I think that really finished it out. Once I got the left and right side gable end trim up, it really completed the look of the doghouse, and just made it look really nice and somewhat expensive, even though it wasn't that expensive. Well, that's going to wrap up this project. I hope this video helped you out in your project, and if it did, then please leave it a like. If you like DIY and woodworking projects, then hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. That's another way that you can support our channel at no cost to you. I'll also leave a link in the video description below to all the tools and equipment that we used on this project, and that's another way that you can support the channel at no cost to you. If you're looking for a Smokey Mountain Vacation, I'll also leave links to our 2 Airbnb cabins located in the Smoky Mountains. They're located in Pigeon Forge and just outside of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I'll also leave a link to our Etsy store where we build post office box door banks, and we sell those through our Etsy store. Well, until next time, this is Rick with the Ingrain Workshop. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching.